Hey guys, Evan's here. Super excited to talk to or share with you guys a little bit about training. And today is a little comprehensive. Of course, we're not going to hit everything it takes with training, but if you're building out a workout on your own, or you're wondering how where some of the thought process coming from when it comes to building a workout, we're going to discuss it today. So it's not new information. It's not something that we created. These are concepts that have been around since people have been programming exercise. So feel free to ask questions along the way. A lot of this material does come from Dr. Eric Helms. I love his work. He was one of the first people that kind of influenced me when I first started my journey in coaching others and helping others with fitness and nutrition. So, the first thing is to understand that, adherence is the most important thing when it comes to getting both short-term and long-term results, right? Basically, some clients get upset with us because we're like, hey, if you're more consistent, you'll get better results. But the reality is that whatever program you pick, we're talking specifically about exercise today. Adherence is what's going to create the gains. Adherence is what's going to get you the results. My children now are training for sports and things like that. Well, how they're going to get better is they got to show up for the workout consistently. So one technique or acronym they use in school when they teach us how to program workouts is the idea of FIT, right? And that has to do with frequency, intensity, time, type, and enjoyment. Basically, if you have those things in, you will be adherent typically to the workout because you like it, and you will be able to get results because you're doing it often enough, intense enough, and have the timepiece locked in. It's really important, though, as people are going through a fitness journey, we have to realize that fitness is a journey, not a destination. There's actually a study done, which is kind of cool. They looked at two groups of individuals who did who was shooting for a goal. I think the goal was like 24 weeks out. And we'll talk about that when I talk about time in a second. But one group of individuals, they were just focused on the goal during that time frame. And the other group was focused on the process. And the people who were process oriented actually exceeded the goal and crushed the goal oriented people. There's a lot of stressors that we add to the equation that minimizes our adherence when we're just only focused on, I got to be this X number on the scale, as if a number on a scale or a certain speed is the definition of ourselves. But really, it's the process, is us pounding the stone consistently that's going to really create those long-term results. So just to ensure everybody knows what the 5 layers, or I think it's 6 layers we're going to talk about in this exercise pyramid. It starts with adherence, and then we're going to talk about volume, intensity, and frequency, and then we're going to go through progressions. We'll discuss exercise selection, like picking the right exercises, rest periods, and even the tempo in which you lift, which does make a big difference. So, Lynn says here, it took a long time to realize that fitness is a journey, not just a goal or a stop. And what's cool is that even though it is a journey, you do take a couple stops along the road, and that's where goal setting comes in, which is really important. And so the first consideration that we have as we're looking at adherence is, what's my time frame to reach my goal? Now, I talked a little bit earlier that, in the fitness community, typically goals are set on a weekly thing. It's kind of the reason why they do is because this countdown method, right? So it's like, hey, I have 24 weeks, I have 12 weeks, I'm 10 weeks out. So like, especially in like the fitness competitor, like the bodybuilders and all those and power lifters and all those, they're like, hey, I'm 6 weeks from my show, I'm 12 weeks out. The reality is that if we don't have sometimes a deadline for when we need to perform by, well, this week I'll just skip working out this week. But if I know I need to be at X place by X time, which is a little different than a lifestyle progression, then it forces us to do the things that we need to do to meet our goal. So that's something, to look at is, what time frame have I allotted to reach my goal? The second thing is kind of look at is, what does my schedule allow? Meaning, allow me to do consistently. All too often, especially as, many of us get introduced to exercise and fitness, we introduced as a child, right? So we have nothing on the schedule. So we have all the time in the world. So yes, we can go train for an hour and a half. And like I trained my son and daughter for about an hour, 15 minutes on Monday. And then he went home and shot free throws for another hour on his own. Well, if you're an adult, you don't got that kind of like liberty in your schedule. So you have to consider, what does my schedule allow me to do on a consistent basis? And if I can do 30 minutes consistently, I'll crush someone who can do an hour sporadically. So it's about developing that momentum. When you're looking at adherence, also, you should be flexibility built into your program. So flexibility should account for things like stress. And the stressors could be anywhere from the previous workout could have been a stressor, or life workouts. There's something called daily undulating training. And that method, what people do is like they go into the gym, they see how they feel, and based on how they feel determines the intensity in which they go after. And even though that sounds very subjective, it's found to actually keep people adherent, and that adherence actually causes them to get better and better gains. Now, there are those days where you just got to suck it up and make it happen. But for the most part, you can't actually just create this time frame where, boom, I'm good. And then, if I'm not feeling strong today, or I'm stressed out about something, depending on how I manage stress can determine how hard I go in the paint, for lack of a better term. Also, you should have flexibility based on stressors. Energy. Thank you, Alexis, for that nice smile. Helped me realize I said the same thing twice. But for energy, because, if you're feeling flat or tired, and even though your programming says you should increase your weight by 10%, it doesn't mean you can increase your weight by 10%. So, this goes into this whole, like, what's the best time of day to train? Hopefully I'm not stepping on anybody's feet, but the best time to train is the time that you train. So people are like, I heard that like fasted cardio is what it is. Well, let's think through that. I train fasted state, so I burn X calories. When I eat, what happens? I stop fasting, so I store X calories. Over the course of the day, my energy exertion is still the same. That's just cute. But if it allows you to stay consistent, that's what you should be doing. So the best time to train is the time that works for you best, which is really important. So we have to have that flexibility in there. And a lot of times people are concerned with like missing workouts. What if I miss a workout? Then what do I do? Well, your program should give you room to miss it. Again, very few people that we serve are in such a tight level of their programming that one day is going to make a big difference. So if you miss it, pick it up another day. That's fine. And as the last thing to realize is that we don't lift just to lift, right? Life is not about lifting weights, right? So we train so we can do life. It's kind of like you go to college so you can get a job, right? You train so you can do life. So what does that mean is that because we train now, we should be more physically active, and exercise and activity together will support you training. Like, I know everybody knows I'm not like the basketball guy, but we used to play like basketball. A group of us would get together and we play some sports. And when I started training, it actually encouraged me to play more, because when they were trying to hold that pick, they realized, hey, these strong legs can hold me, down by the basket, so those things should work in cohesion. And as an adult, it should help you garden better. It should help you take care of your kids better and run around. It should help you climb a flight of stairs and not be winded. So training should help you do your physical activity, which is really cool. Keisha, we give you a shout out. She's just been crushing it for the last probably 2.5 weeks, which is really cool. She said, I appreciate the knowledge that she's been receiving since we started. We love you too. Keep up the good work in there. So those are some things to kind of think about from the standpoint of, the how do I be adherent? What can I maintain consistently? I'll tell you this, even because Keisha, you're a great example for this. We have so many people who will come to us and they're like, should I start 3 days a week, 4 days a week? I want to do 5 days a week. I'm like, how many days a week you doing now? 0. I'm like, yeah, let's start with 2. You're right. And then after they get into a rhythm of doing 2, then they can turn around and add that 3rd day in there to get some more, benefit or output. So that brings us to, okay, now we're training. How much training load should I do? And how often should I train? And we start looking at things like what's called volume, which talks to like how much training or intensity, how hard I should train. And I already talked a little bit about frequency, and that can be different. But here's the deal: if I train at a high level of intensity, then I have to train at a lower frequency. So one of the most popular things today is HIIT training, high intensity interval training. And people do HIIT training. Well, what happens is so intense on your nervous system, whether you do for 4 minutes or you do for 10 or 20 minutes, that you should not do it more than 3 to 4 times a week. Because if you do, you actually cause nerve damage to your central nervous system. So the way you like manage stress can be altered by overtraining. So it needs to ensure that if you train at high level of intensity, you recover for longer. Which is really important. So there's a kind of little thing to kind of figure out, okay, how much is a good way to go? If I want to gain a little bit of muscle, what should I do? If I want to get stronger, what should I do? So the idea behind the volume is I should maybe do 10 to 20 sets, which is like I did 5 and I took a rest, per muscle group or movement pattern per week. So I shouldn't be doing like people like, just is what it is, right? I want glutes, I want glutes like you, Evans. I got to work for these glutes, Well, how you get these glutes is you can't do glutes every day, So what you have to do is you got to do some glutes and you got to rest them. You get 10 to 20 sets a week, and then it can grow. Now, if you want the muscle hypertrophy or you want the glutes to be bigger, I don't know why I'm picking on glutes all of a sudden, then the rep range should probably be like 6 to 12, somewhere in there. And then at least for like 3/4 of those time frame. And then you probably want to take a couple times when you're doing it like real heavy, and other times you're doing light, just a lot of volume. And I say a lot of reps, meaning up to like 20 reps, in there, And then as far as frequency, each muscle group should be touched twice a week if your program allows for it. If not, then you can do a 2-day split. It all depends on what your lifestyle allows. We're saying optimally, you can split it into 2 days and maybe you just hit upper body one day and lower body another day. There's this guy, Mike Menser, I believe. He's an old school bodybuilder. And he created a program back in the days where you only hit one muscle group per day. And people would get like massive gains because their recovery time was so great that when they hit it again, the muscles got bigger and a lot stronger. So it really depends on how long am I working out and everything else. But volume just has to do with the total amount of reps and sets and weight load that I'm doing over that particular time frame. So how do we get stronger? We get strong by creating tension or this neurological adaptation to stress. So if you imagine if I was holding my hand, your hand was out to mine, you pushed against my hand. When I pushed you and you have to push back, over time, you start getting stronger and stronger. And that's how your muscles get stronger, is by loading them up. But volume doesn't come from lifting size doesn't come from lifting really heavy weights. Size happens to doing heavy enough that you can do a lot. So an example, let's say if you're a guy and you want a bigger chest, right? You can do push-ups, but push-ups is not that heavy of a load on your chest. Now when you're brand new, it's like 10 push-ups is like, that's heavy. But relative to where your strength gains comes in a short period of time, it's not that heavy. So push-ups can help you gain size to some degree. But at some point, you need to put more weight against your pecs for them to grow. But if you decide I'm going to go under the bar and I'm going to go and just do like my 2-rep max or my 3-rep max consistently, you're probably going to get injured. But let's say you don't get injured, you're not going to get much bigger. Now you can get stronger, but you don't get bigger, per se. So I see a lot of power guys though, and they're really big. Well, if they're big, a lot of times you may see the couple bodybuilding type workouts tied to it, or they're just big dudes. Like they need to be on that nutrition talk we do next week. You know what I mean? But they're not just big. You have to get enough volume to be big. So that's something to really look at is, training consistently and finding that good rhythm where you're recovering well. If you're coming into your next leg day and you're, you know, if you come into your next leg day and you're still really sore, that means you train too hard, and you have to back that off a little bit, so you can train at the right rhythm. It is something you learn. It's not something that people do automatically, and that's where having a trainer design your program and taking that into account matters. I'll say one last thing. When we look at this whole idea of intensity, we've seen people get better results by leaving 2 to 3 in the tank consistently than going all out every single time. So it's kind of weird dynamic where it's like, well, shouldn't I just go to until I fail? And I mean, I've trained people for muscle failure for a long time, but the research just shows that individuals can actually get better gains by coming just under. And it's something you learn. You're like, I feel I could do 2 more. That's when I stop. And we'll see him get a lot. So I took up a good portion of it, but I'm gonna be quiet for a while as these guys talk about, other pieces in here, with it. So I think next we have Katie.
With the progression.
Yes.
All right. So we can look at 2 different things here. Our progressive overload, the principle of progressive overload is this idea that you have to keep taxing your muscles a little bit beyond what they can currently do in order to keep making improvements. So when we have clients coming here, we'll often hear no, I used the lighter weight last week for that. And we're like, yeah, we know, but we have to keep pushing it a little bit more each time in order to continue to see progress, right? And then you can also look at progressions kind of over your lifetime of exercise. So looking at from being a novice person in the gym to being an intermediate person in the gym to being our quote unquote expert. So when you're first starting out as our novice, it is a lot easier to see progress because you have a lot more area to grow, right? So if you just continue pushing yourself a little bit at each workout, increasing your weight from workout to workout, you're going to see a lot quicker gains than someone who's maybe at that intermediate or at that expert level. Someone who's just beginning might be able to say they're doing a back squat, just throw on another 5-pound plate on each side each time they go into their leg day. So once or twice a week if they're doing squats. Whereas someone in an intermediate level might be looking more at what we call linear progression. So that would look at it decreasing your reps as you raise your weight. So one week you're doing squats with 200 pounds on the bar, you did 10 squats, and next week maybe you're only doing 8 squats with a little bit more weight on the bar. And then someone at the expert level might be looking more at what Evans talked about, that 1 rep max, or using an as many rounds as possible format. So you're doing a couple exercises as many times as you possibly can in a 10-minute period in order to keep seeing those gains. There will be a point, everyone has a genetic determination that there's some point that you're not going to be able to lift any more weight. So you can't just keep adding weight to the bar forever and keep progressing in that way. Nevin's talked about volumes. You can always look at changing up your volume as well instead of just continuing to add on more weight. An important part of progressions that people might overlook is also this idea of a rest period or a deloading week. We do need to give our muscles a break so that we can continue to progress over the long term. So this might look at doing the same workout but dropping your weight to 50% or doing a different workout altogether that hits the same muscle groups just for a week, and then you might find coming out of that week that you can hit those muscles even harder and see those strength gains. When we're looking at an isolation exercise, so a bicep curl versus something like a squat where you're working multiple muscle groups, you're not necessarily going to be able to progress the same way with that bicep curl as you are with that squat. When I think about my bicep, it's one little muscle group. If I try to add on 5 pounds every time I'm doing bicep curls, I'm not getting very far. I'm not going to be able to do it. So don't expect the same rate of progression for a single muscle group versus doing something like a squat where you're working a bunch of different muscle groups together. The last thing I want to touch on is there are things outside of the gym that affect your progression. So if you've hit like a plateau and you can't figure out why you're not progressing further, why you're not able to lift more, to go longer, are you sleeping well? Are you recovering? Are you leaving enough space between your workouts? What does your stress level look like outside of the gym? Because all of those things can affect how you're progressing.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And you know, again, when you're brand new, it's, you know, it's, you don't have to think about all these things, you know, but as you start growing through there, you are looking at, you know, man, I wasn't able to lift as much, you know, the next day. So, Alexis, talk to us a little bit. Your mic's muted.
Sorry, guys. So another extra part of the exercise pyramid is your exercise selection. So some things to pay attention to during your exercise selection is specificity, efficiency, weak points, and exercise order. I'm going to explain each one and give like a few examples of each one. So for the first one, specificity, it's important in many aspects of fitness. For example, choosing certain exercises to train movements, so such as like a squat. You want to get better with the squat. To get better with the squat, you want to do the squat a lot, just to develop like the specific muscle groups that are being activated during a squat. And then other specific things you want to like focus on are intensities throughout your program. So if you have like a certain goal, such as hypertrophy, which is to, like Evan said, is to increase the size of your muscles, then you're going to focus more on exercises that are going to increase muscle sizes. And then each one ranges for like hypertrophy is about 6 to 12 reps, like Evan's already talked about. And then you're going to focus more on like 3 to 4 sets. So specific intensities for certain goals is also important. The same thing for strength, which is the amount of force a muscle group of muscles can exert against a load like a dumbbell or bands. To gain strength, you're going to focus more on. To gain strength, you want to focus more on exercises that are going to get you stronger. So, like Evans also talked about earlier, like hitting that range where you're doing about 3 to 5 reps, but you're going to do 3 to 5 reps of a weight that is close to your like one rep max. I'm sorry. And you're probably going to do just about 4 to 5 sets of those. But for both goals, you're gonna have, so for hypertrophy and for strength, you're gonna have a specific way to train for those. And then another part of your exercise selection is your efficiency. So efficiency is about being efficient on what exercises to use and how to include them into your program. So for example, when starting your routine, you want to make sure that you're hitting your compound movements, which are your exercises that are involving more than one joint and more than one muscle group. And then you want to add the isolated exercises with targets that one joint muscle group, like Katie talked about with the bicep curl, and then you have your squat. So your squat is your compound exercise and your isolated movement is your bicep curl. And you want to focus on putting both of those into a program. That way you just have well-balanced muscular development and you're not really experiencing like any weak points. Another example of that can be if you're so focused on getting being stronger in a squat. Well, there's plenty of things plenty of muscles that you're using in a squat, which is like your hamstrings. You're using your hamstrings in a squat. So it's not just doing things that are going to increase your quad strength, but you also got to work on your hamstrings as well. So like doing leg curls. So your efficiency is important on how you're programming your routine. Other things in an exercise selection you want to focus on is your weak points. So weak points are specific deficiencies in a muscle group. This is important when you're focused on getting stronger, like I kind of spoke about earlier. It's important when you're getting stronger with certain movements. We are working on all the muscles that are in that one movement. So when you're doing a deadlift, for example, which is like one of the big heavy lifts. It's a compound exercise. You don't just want to focus on strengthening your hamstrings. The deadlift has a lot of muscles that are involved. So it can be your hamstrings, your lower back, even grip strength. So you want to focus on little exercises that are going to not just strengthen you to do deadlifts, but everything else. So you want to break down those muscles into one and focus on those to get those stronger. So you won't really experience any like weak points, because when you do, then you can have a high risk of injury. You may not have proper form, which is also a weak point. And then, sorry guys, there's like, and then other weak points can also be from biomechanical issues. So for example, like limb lengths, which oh my God, I'm so sorry, which might make certain exercises like less ideal for someone. And then lastly, when you're thinking about exercise selection, is like your exercise order. Exercise order is very important. So in the beginning, you want to start off with like your most compound exercise or your most complex movement that is going to be like the most fatiguing or exert the most energy. And then they also have like a higher risk of injury, sorry. So what we want to do is you want to do those compound exercises when you're fresh, and then you add like the accessory work, which is building all the other muscles that are around the major muscles of your muscle groups of your compound movement. If you guys get that. So
awesome.
An example of that is when we're programming, we do. What was that?
I just said awesome. Go ahead.
For the exercise order, if you guys may notice when we're doing your programs, you might work on like your first exercise is something that's most exerting. So like a bench press or a deadlift. We do that in the beginning, and then as we go through your workout, we're doing like single muscle movements, because it doesn't take much energy as it would in the beginning of your workout from your compound exercises. And that's really all I have for exercise selection.
All right, so I'm going to talk about rest periods. Some of our clients love rest time and taking their time with it. Some of them want to jump right back into it. It is really important to get that rest in there, because you don't want to fatigue your muscles. So everybody talks about hypertrophy. We want that muscle growth. And what helps that is the high volume training produced with a large growth hormone response. So what happens when we work out is sometimes we have metabolic fatigue, which is also known as muscle fatigue. So this is where your muscles respond to intense exercises that exceeds the rate of energy replacement. You also have muscle damage. This is the micro tears that we get, that we tell all of our clients about. This is where you get your DOM. So this is the delayed onset of muscle soreness. And another thing is those drop sets. So that's where we start at like 80% of your 1 rep max, and you do that until you fatigue, and they just drop like into a lower weight. So they go to 75, and they keep going with minimum rest. Now, there wasn't a significant difference in the results with the straight set, where they're doing the same with a 3-minute rest in between. So other than that, you are excessively overloading that muscle with the drop sets. So if we're going for muscular endurance, so this is less than 70% of your 1 rep max. This is 12 to 15 or up for reps. You need 30 seconds or less of a rest time. When we're shooting for hypertrophy, which is what we do range for, we are at 70 to 85% of our 1 rep max. And that is 6 to 12 reps. We need 30 to 90 seconds. And when we go for strength and power, this is greater than 85% of your 1 rep max. This is only 1 to 5 reps. So this, you need 2 to 5 minutes. Why is this important? To rest in between sets, it influences the efficiency, the safety, and the effectiveness of the program. Your muscles start tapping into those fuel sources for energy. So ATP, so this only a couple seconds. This is getting you that burst. Creatine phosphate, this is 30 seconds at the max. So this is where your creatine phosphate is using to reconstitute the ATP. This is your sprint, this is your weightlifting. And then if we go above 30 seconds, this is your anaerobic glycolysis. So this transforms the glucose into lactate when the limited oxygen is present.
That's awesome. So to answer your question, Mr. Simmons, breaks are mandatory. You know, there's no like, hey, I'm just going to go from one exercise to the other. I mean, you can, but you won't see results. And the name of the game for us is, we don't, our typical training program or workout's about 30 minutes. In that 30 minutes of time, we have to get that so efficient that you can actually get results in that time frame. And I talk to people all the time. They're like, how do you look like that only train for 30 minutes? Well, we know what we're doing, but we have other people who train for an hour and a half, and they have the same physique even. And it's just inefficiency in that time frame. So that's something to look at. Understand as you look at this pyramid, though, and everybody's shared about these different aspects, it's lesser and lesser important the further you go up. So if I'm brand spanking new, I don't need to be worried with what is hyper what. I don't need to think about any of that kind of stuff. I don't have to worry about exercise selection. I just need to be consistent. But then over time, you start going, man, I hit a wall. What could I do? And I've talked to people. They say they've been doing the same workouts for months, if not even almost a year or years. They're like, oh, I do the same thing every time I go into the gym. Well, the reason why they hit a wall is because their brain has now adjusted to this is the work I'm going to do when I go in the gym. So they stop getting results, so in this adage of muscle confusion is really important to switch it in there. So I'm going to talk about, it's probably the least important thing as we wrap up of all the things we talked about. And it's the idea of tempo. So tempo has to deal with, there's 4 spots or like places, for lack of a better term, in every lift, so in every time you lift weights, there are 4 different areas. You should always start, if you want to think about where to start the lift, you start it in the shortened muscle position. So if I'm doing a chest press, I'm actually not counting here. I actually start here. So my muscles are the shortest. And then, so I go from here. That's 1 point. 1 point's here. The second point is the traveling to the elongated portion. That's 2. The bottom of this movement is 3. Traveling back up is 4. So those are like 4 different sections of your lift. And, when people start programming out to get really detailed to maximize the results, they're actually timing each portion of that execution. So you'll hear terms like time under tension. That's a great question, Lynn. I'm going to answer that question in a second. So when we use that terminology, what we're talking about is how long does that muscle experience tension? Give an example. If I do 10 squats really fast, it's not going to have the same results as if I do 10 squats really slow. So the time that you put under tension is really important. And there's different methods and modalities. Since it's the least important thing, I'm definitely not going to spend a lot of time in it, but no pun intended there. But there is a relationship between how long that muscle is stressed and the results that you get, meaning muscle growth and things like that. So in most studies, though, it does show that if you train like super slow, it doesn't have the same results as if you train like at maybe at a quicker tempo. So you'll hear people go like 3 seconds down, 2 seconds up, or if it's a bench, just 1, 2, 3, 1. You don't have to take 5, 6, 10 seconds down. It hasn't shown to increase strength or muscle hypertrophy as much. So that's something to really consider. So, the question is it important to do cardio first or last in the workout? And the answer is yes. Let me explain. So when you first start your workout, the important portion is warming up, right? So warming up does a lot of things, right? It lubricates your joints, so you have in your joints, in between your joints, you have these sacs, and they hold in there something called synovial fluid, which helps your joints move and keep it nice and what we call lubed. Well, when you start moving the joints, if you ever wake up and feel stiff, but the more you start moving, the looser you feel, is because your body is now pumping more synovial fluid in those joints. So when you lift and when you work out, you should start with some measure of cardio or I shouldn't say warm up to add that component in there. Now, research has shown that if you do increase your core temperature while you exercise, your risk factor for injury decreases dramatically. So that's where like pre-workout cardio or lifting cardio comes in place. Is you should do some short-term bout of cardio just to increase your body's core temperature. Now, you can increase your body's core temperature through other dynamic movements as well. So leg swings and, some other things, but all depends on like, what does your physical limitation have? If it's the less physical limitations, the more dynamic stretching and movements you can do, the less you should do, so you can just go on the rower and the elliptical for 3 to 4 minutes and think about the movement pattern that's happening on the elliptical or the rower, right? If I'm on the elliptical, my hips are moving, my knees are moving, my ankles are moving. So now I'm increasing and warming up there. But even though you do that to increase your core temp, you still have to do movements that are consistent with what you're going to train with. So let's say I go and I decide I'm going to warm up, I'm going to run. It gets my shoulders, my elbows, my core, because I have to maintain core stability in the angle, my hips, my knees, my ankles. Man, I got all my major joints in a run. So I'll just go and run really quick to warm up. Well, the challenge is if it's chest day, my nervous system doesn't know my chest is going to work right now. So it's kind of cold, for lack of a better term. So some push-ups, some thoracic stuff, some lighter bench pressing. Those things will now get my nervous system to fire or to be aware that, hey, this is the muscle that's actually being worked. So a little longer answer, but the answer is yes, you should do a short bout of cardio to increase your core temperature to decrease risk, but then you should also add in movements that are consistent with whatever's in your program for that day. What I see a lot of people do pre-workout are things to kill their workout. And no matter how much I trying to talk to some people, they still do it, and they get bad results as a result of it. Is they'll come in and they'll hit the foam roller pre-workout. That's like the worst thing you can do. And they'll lay on the foam roller and I'm just rolling up my lats and rolling up my glutes, but they don't understand that your entire program is a neurological effort, not just a muscular effort. Meaning your nerves, when you foam roll nice and slow. Now, there's a technique on the foam roller to upregulate the nervous system, but most people don't know how to do that. But they're doing that nice, slow, digging it in, all that kind of stuff. You're down regulating your nervous system and you're telling your body to relax right before the workout. So that actually can increase risk for injury, but it definitely doesn't allow you to get the results that you want to get in the gym because your power output is lower, not because you don't have enough glucose, not because you don't have enough strength. It's lower because your nervous system says it's nap time. And but your brain is saying, no, your conscious brain is like, no, we need to lift. So the inverse is you should, some people do pre-exhaustion or just challenge that muscle a little bit before you go into the lift, and then you'll see a great lift. Spend the time on the back end. Spend 10, 15 minutes after your workout. Do lengthening stretches, do foam rolling, do all those kind of things, and that's going to help you get some really good gains. Maybe next week we should do that, like, hey, go live and do like our favorite warm up and cool down. That's something we don't have to stay and move. And I think that would be kind of fun to do that. But it'll show you like what to do and maybe some things not to do pre-workout and post-workout to really help you guys get gains. So that's what we're on the schedule for next week. And then we'll just push nutrition a following week. But I think that's going to be really, really good. Any other questions you guys have as we wrap up or closing comments from you guys? All right, Katie's going to go first and everybody's going to leave a closing comment.
I do actually have a question about when we're talking about rest. What about some of our clients have been doing these epoch workouts, but we're trying to limit the rest.
Mm-hmm.
So how does that factor in with like meeting that rest period?
Great question. So we're talking about someone doing a HIIT to high intensity workout, but they're not getting a lot of rest in. So let's talk about the rest cycle, right? There's a couple things in the rest cycle. One is the restoring of ATP. Amanda talks about that, in there. So in your workout, you typically only tap into your ATP, system, the creatine phosphate. I know this is a little techie, and then you also tap into a little bit of anaerobic glycolysis. You don't really hit fat oxidation, so you don't really do cardio, like aerobic respiration to burn fat in a 30-minute lifting routine. So if they're doing it in what we call this EPOC workout, and just to explain what EPOC is, EPOC stands for excess post-exercise oxygen consumption. Some people may call it the afterburn effect, but that's the EPOC is like the technical term for it. And basically, we all have experienced it. You're up a flight of stairs, you were laying down, sleeping in bed, the phone rang, you realized it was upstairs, you ran up the flight of stairs, and when you get on the phone, you sound like Darth Vader. Like, yeah, hello. You're like, hey, can I speak to Mary? Hi, I'm just trying to catch my breath, kind of thing. So we've all experienced that, and it takes you longer to come down than it does for your heart rate to actually come up. The benefit of this, really quick, is that it takes you a longer time to go into homeostasis, so you burn more calories post-exercise than you did during the exercise. Faster metabolism, really good idea. So in these workouts, how do you marry rest periods with this high intensity and this frequency? Is you don't tap the same muscle consistently. So meaning I may do 12 push-ups, and then I do 12 squats. Well, my chest is cooling down or getting its recovery time. My body's restoring ATP for my chest to go again when my legs are working. Then I may do some squat to press. Well, the load is going to be a little bit different on my shoulders and my legs than it is on just my legs only, then I may do something else, so as I'm shifting from exercise to exercise, I should be taking somewhere between 20 to 40, 50 seconds rest, depending on the conditioning of the individual, but I should be tapping into different systems consistently. So in these, workouts that we call the EPOC workouts, the biggest system that's getting overload is my cardiovascular system. And none of the weight should be heavy enough, except for maybe the first 2 to 3 exercises that I'm hitting anywhere near my anaerobic threshold or a muscle fatigue. Meaning, like Alexis said, I may start off with deadlift, and that first thing I do is some heavy deadlift, and I got to rest for a minute. Right? And then I go in and I may do a heavy bench press or a lat pull down, and then I have to rest for a minute. But then if we have deadlifts again in the workout, you'll notice that the reps are like 15 reps instead of 5 or 8. So the weight had to come down dramatically. So the recovery time comes down dramatically as well. And that's how you're able to tap into it. But you may not catch your breath until this thing is over. So at minute 26, you're like, all right, stretch me, and I'm being a little dramatic, but sometimes it doesn't feel that way, So that's to answer that question is we're tapping into different systems, but if we're going heavier lifts and going to fatigue, we have to force in the rest time, or we're just not physically able to lift the same weight again. Great question. Cool deal. Well, we've been chatting with you guys a bit. Go ahead, Alexis.
I was just going to say, can everyone's rest time be different depending on like what level of fitness they're in? So like if they're doing a deadlift and you say like rest for a minute, but say there's 2 people at different levels, does that vary as well?
Yes, absolutely. So to answer that question, we had a client back in the day, Portia. She was a client for a long time. And Portia, because of the training method that we use, she restored ATP at a very fast rate. So you can kind of tell. So how do you do this if, let's say you're not working with a trainer, you're watching this and you're like, man, I came in at this mark. How do I know when to go and how long do I put a clock on it? You can kind of use this idea of rate of perceived exertion, RPE. Am I fresh? Am I ready to go? I feel I can do it again. Yeah. All right, cool. Let's go after it. So some people, it's a lower time and some people it's a longer time. When we're programming in, like I programmed for Amanda and Katie today, they started most of their things with a 60-minute rest time. But other things, you can kind of tell they're getting a little bit bored, and we shut that down real fast, and we went down to 30 and 45 second time frame. So yes, but as someone gets more and more efficient, they actually restore ATP faster. I shouldn't say efficient. That's the wrong word, actually. The word, I don't know if it's efficient, but whatever the opposite of efficient is, so my bad. My body is not very efficient, meaning it burns a lot of calories doing nothing. Efficient bodies don't burn any calories at all. And so we don't want efficiency in our body. But as your body becomes more and more conditioned, that's the word I'm looking for, then you actually can you can take lower rest times, providing that you can do the same workload with good form and technique. And I think that's where a lot of people are not paying attention when they're training on their own. They think they can do that same workload, but they can't. So they compromise. So you go in the gym, right? And this is what you see. Some dude with a lot of weight on the bicep curl, and he's like, yeah. He's like, yeah, I'm killing it. Drop sets, baby. And then he shows up at a local physical therapist and wonder why he has back pain. So he wasn't really able to execute that at the same amount at the same time. But yeah, it's going to be very subjective. It's more of where our work as coaches and trainers go into this art more than science. Because the science is going to be 30 to 90 seconds is good for everybody except for powerlifters. Powerlifters need to be outside of 90, like 2, 3. I mean, there's sometimes I've lifted and had to take a 5-minute break before I can do that again. But for most people, 30 to 90 seconds is pretty good. But where you are in the 30 to 90 seconds is going to be where you are in your conditioning. Great, great stuff. Any closing comments over there, Amanda?
Just that I love everybody.
Yeah, we love you too. That's awesome. Do you hear that, Tina? She loves you. Shout out. Talk to you guys in a bit. Great session, guys.